I went back to my hometown for the first time in years during a short New Year's vacation. I hadn't wanted to return, not really. I'd left as soon as I was old enough, and I never looked back. My hometown was the kind of place people forgot existed. No nearby cities, no neighboring towns for miles. When night fell, the silence didn't feel calm. It felt heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on you, waiting to be disturbed. That year, instead of staying with family or booking a hotel, my brothers and a couple of close friends decided to rent an Airbnb just outside town. The house sat at the end of a long gravel driveway surrounded by dead oak trees that clawed at the sky like skeletal fingers. It was an old Victorian home, huge, elegant, in a decayed way, and it had clearly been renovated just enough to look inviting without ever feeling safe. When I arrived, my brothers Elias and Sam were already there, along with our friends Mark and Chloe. Mark was the skeptic, the kind of guy who laughed during scary movies and looked for logic in everything. Chloe was his opposite, nervous, reactive, always prepared for the worst. Elias was the balance between them, calm, observant, the one who usually grounded all of us. As I stepped out of my car, the sun was dipping below the tree line, casting long shadows across the porch. I paused before entering. I had that feeling, the one I'd learned not to ignore. The sensation that someone or something was watching me. Inside the house smelled like lemon cleaner and old wood. There was also something faint beneath it, metallic, almost like old blood or pennies. "You're late," Elias said, handing me a beer. "Traffic," I lied. The truth was, I'd spent 20 minutes sitting in my car at a gas station 10 miles away, seriously considering turning around. That first night passed mostly uneventfully. We stayed up late in the living room, surrounded by heavy velvet furniture and mirrors, far too many mirrors. They lined the walls, filled the wardrobes, even sat decoratively on tables. The room felt endless, like it folded back on itself, and every time I looked away I caught movement that turned out to be my own reflection. At around 2 a.m., we headed to bed. The second floor had 4 bedrooms, and above it all was a finished attic that had been turned into a game room. I was placed in the bedroom at the end of the hall, directly beside the pull-down attic stairs. I was exhausted, but sleep never came. The house creaked and groaned like old houses do, but then there was another sound. One that didn't belong. It was coming from directly above me. It sounded like something heavy being dragged slowly across the attic floor. I sat up in bed listening. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. After a moment, the sound stopped. I waited. Nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself it was pipes or an animal and lay back down. The next morning over breakfast, I brought it up casually. "Did anyone go into the attic last night?" Mark laughed. "Dude, no. These houses make noise. Old radiators shifting beams. You're overthinking it." "I heard it too," Chloe said quietly. It sounded like footsteps. Elias frowned. No one was up. Sam snored all night. We laughed it off, but the mood had changed. The house felt thicker, heavier. That afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. While everyone else was outside, I pulled down the attic stairs and climbed up. The attic was massive. Furniture sat under white sheets, couches, armchairs, old wardrobes. In the center was a dusty pool table, but something on the floor made my stomach drop. Footprints. Bare footprints. They were small, too small for an adult, but the toes were elongated, unnatural. And they didn't just cross the room. They led directly to a large, uncovered wardrobe in the corner. As I approached, I heard a sound from inside. A soft, wet clicking noise. Like someone clicking their tongue. I didn't open the wardrobe. I ran. Back downstairs, I nearly collided with Sam in the hallway. "There's something in the attic," I told him. "Footprints. Someone or something is up there." He stared at me for a moment before speaking. "Just let it go," he said flatly. "You're killing the vibe." Like he was carrying something heavy. That night, I stayed downstairs as long as possible. At one point, I went to the kitchen for water and caught my reflection in the window over the sink. But behind me, at the base of the attic stairs, stood a figure. Thin, too thin, wearing a tattered, yellow-stained nightgown. Long hair hung over its face as it stared upward at the attic door. I dropped the glass. It shattered loudly. When I turned around, the hallway was empty. Later, I noticed something else. a wet smudge on the window right where the figure's face should have been. That night, the sounds returned, dragging, scratching, and then fingernails dragging slowly across my bedroom door. A whisper followed, coming from beneath my bed. "I can see you through the floorboards." I didn't scream when I heard the voice. I couldn't. My lungs felt locked in place, like the air had been vacuumed out of the room. "I can see you through the floorboards," the voice whispered again. It was raspy, wet, like someone with a mouth full of gravel trying to speak. "You have such a pretty reflection." The sound wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from under my bed. I shot upright, pulling my knees to my chest. The darkness felt alive, pressing in on me from all sides. I grabbed the heavy flashlight I'd left on my nightstand and held it like a weapon, pointing it at the gap beneath the bed. Nothing moved. No breathing. No shifting weight. Just silence, thick and suffocating. I didn't move again until sunlight began leaking through the curtains. When morning finally came, I pushed the dresser away from the door and stepped into the hallway, my legs shaking so badly I almost fell. Chloe was already there. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, knees pulled to her chest, rocking back and forth. Her eyes were red and swollen, like she hadn't slept at all. Elias knelt beside her, one arm around her shoulders, his face pale in a way I'd never seen before. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Chloe looked up at me, her eyes wide and terrified. "My jewelry," she said. "My rings, my watch. Everything's gone." Her voice broke, and when I woke up, there was hair on my pillow. She held up a small, filthy clump of dark, greasy hair. Mark stepped out of his room, then any trace of skepticism wiped clean from his face. He stared at the attic stairs. The pull-down cord was swaying gently, like someone had just let go of it. "We're leaving," Mark said. "Now. I don't care about the money. We're done." We rushed to pack, shoving clothes into bags without folding them. No one argued. No one joked. The house felt angry now, like it knew we were trying to escape. As we gathered in the foyer, Elias looked around. "Where's Sam?" The silence that followed was immediate and terrifying. We called his name. Nothing. Elias took the stairs, 2 at a time, shouting for him. His bedroom was empty. The bed was perfectly made. The window was wide open, freezing air pouring in. There were no footprints outside. Not in the frost. Not in the snow. Then, we heard it. A dull, rhythmic thumping. From above us. From the attic. And then came Sam's voice. "Help me," it said, but it was wrong. Too high-pitched. Warped. Like a broken recording. It's dark in the wardrobe. My blood ran cold. That clicking sound echoed again, wet, eager. Elias didn't hesitate. He bolted for the attic stairs, Mark and I right behind him. Chloe froze at the top of the staircase, sobbing into her hands. The attic was pitch black, cold. The smell up there was overwhelming, damp, earth, rust, copper. The wardrobe doors were wide open. Inside, the back panel had been torn away, revealing a narrow crawl space. In here, Sam's distorted voice called, "I can't move." Elias crawled inside without a second thought. We heard his boots scraping against wood, then silence. Elias, Mark called out. Nothing. Then came a sound that didn't belong in any human space. A deep, guttural growl. Elias was thrown backward out of the wardrobe, blood smeared across his face. His eyes were wide with pure, unfiltered terror. "Run," he screamed. "Get out of the house now." We didn't argue. We ran. Elias practically carried Chloe down the stairs as we burst out into the freezing morning air. Gravel sprayed behind Mark's SUV as he tore down the driveway. We didn't stop until we were sitting in a brightly lit diner miles away, the normalcy of it all feeling unreal. Finally, Elias spoke. "It wasn't Sam," he said. "What do you mean?" Mark asked. We heard him. "I saw him," Elias whispered. "He was in the crawl space, tied up, gagged, my stomach twisted." "There was a woman," Elias continued. "She was crouched on top of him, holding his jaw, moving it like a puppet. She was the one talking. She was pretending to be him." The police found Sam alive, locked in a hidden cellar beneath the kitchen. They found nests in the walls, stolen clothes, food scraps, hundreds of photographs taken through two-way mirrors. and a journal. Pages and pages of practice, learning our voices. She wasn't a ghost. She was a hunter. I never went back to my hometown. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear a faint thump drag above me, and a voice that sounds exactly like mine whispers from the darkness, "I can see you through the floorboards." I've always found the ocean at night to be the most terrifying thing on Earth. It's a vast black void that moves a living entity that swallows light and hides things that have no business being seen. Yet 3 years ago, I allowed my girlfriend Erica to talk me into a remote coastal getaway in a tiny village on the edge of the Olympic Peninsula in Washington. The plan was simple: a week of hiking, reading, and disconnecting from the world. We rented a cabin that was advertised as private and secluded, which is usually code for "no one will hear you scream." The cabin was a rugged, cedar-planked structure perched on a cliff overlooking a jagged rocky beach. To get there, you had to drive down a 5-mile dirt road that wound through old-growth forest, where the trees were so thick they blotted out the sun even at noon. Our host was a man named Mr. Henderson. He met us at the start of the dirt road to hand over the keys. He was a thin man in his late 60s, with skin like cured leather and eyes that seemed to be looking at something 3 feet behind you. "The tide comes in fast," he said, his voice like grinding stones. "If you're down on the beach after sunset, don't stay in the caves. The water fills them up before you can blink." "We'll stay clear, thanks," I said, trying to be polite. "And one more thing," Henderson added, leaning into my car window. The smell of salt and rotting seaweed rolled off him. "If you see the lights out on the water, don't go down to look. It's just the crabbers. They don't like being disturbed." We laughed it off as local eccentricities. Erica, the ultimate calm thinker, figured he was just an old man who spent too much time alone. I, however, felt that familiar tightening in my chest. The cabin itself was beautiful, if a bit stark. It had huge floor-to-ceiling windows facing the Pacific. That first night we sat on the deck watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky turned a violent shade of purple before fading into a deep, oppressive black. Around 1:00 p.m., Erica went to bed. I stayed up nursing a glass of whiskey and staring out at the ocean. That's when I saw them. Far out on the water, maybe a mile from the shore, 3 pale blue lights were bobbing. They weren't like boat lights. They didn't flicker or sweep across the waves. They were steady, glowing orbs that seemed to be moving in a synchronized circle. I remembered what Henderson said about the crabbers, but something felt wrong. The lights began to move closer to the shore. Rapidly. I grabbed a pair of binoculars from the mantel and focused on the lights. As they hit the surf, I realized they weren't on boats. They were being carried. I could see figures emerging from the water. They were tall, impossibly thin, and moving with a strange jerky gait, like their joints didn't quite work right. They carried long poles with the blue lanterns hanging from the ends. I felt a cold shiver race down my spine. I watched as 4, 5, 6 of these figures walked out of the freezing October surf and onto the rocky beach directly below our cabin. I pulled back from the window, my heart hammering. I turned off the living room lights, hoping they hadn't seen me. I crept back to the window and peeked through the blinds. The figures were standing in a circle on the sand. They had planted the poles in the ground, and the blue light cast an eerie, sickly glow over the rocks. They weren't doing anything. They were just standing there, facing our cabin. "Erica," I whispered, shaking her shoulder. "Erica, wake up!" She groaned, blinking at me. What's wrong? There are people on the beach." "With lights. They're just staring at the house." She sighed, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. "Probably just some kids, Ben. Or Henderson's crabbers. Go back to sleep." "They came out of the water, Erica. They walked out of the ocean." That got her attention. She followed me to the living room and looked out the window. The beach was empty. The poles, the lights, the figures, all gone. "There's nothing there," she said, her voice tinged with annoyance. "You're let the old man's stories get to you. I saw them, Erica. I saw them through the binoculars. It's the whiskey and the moonlight, Ben. Come to bed." The beach remained empty, the tide washing over the rocks, as if nothing had ever been there. The next morning, I decided to go down to the beach to prove to myself I wasn't crazy. I climbed down the steep wooden stairs that led from the cliff to the sand. The air was misty and cold. I walked to the spot where I had seen them. I expected to find nothing, maybe a footprint that the tide had missed. Instead, I found something that made my stomach churn. Arranged in a perfect circle on the sand were 6 dead seals. They weren't just dead, they had been meticulously flayed. Their skins were laid out next to them, arranged in the shape of human beings, and in the center of the circle, pressed deep into the sand, was a single waterproof Polaroid photo. I picked it up, my hands trembling. It was a photo of me, taken from the beach, looking up at the cabin window. I was sitting in the chair, holding my glass of whiskey, staring out into the dark. But in the reflection of the glass behind me, inside the cabin, was the face of one of the thin figures. Its skin was translucent, its eyes huge and milky, and it was reaching its long, spindly fingers toward the back of my head. I didn't tell Erica, not yet. I didn't want to see the panic in her eyes. I tucked the photo into my pocket and walked back to the cabin, my mind racing. That afternoon, the fog rolled in. It was a thick pea soup fog that reduced visibility to about 5 feet. You couldn't see the ocean, couldn't see the trees, couldn't even see the stairs leading down to the beach. Around 4:00 p.m., there was a knock at the door. It wasn't a normal knock. It was a slow, heavy thud, as if someone was hitting the wood with a wet sack of flour. I walked to the door, my hand on the heavy iron bolt. "Who is it?" No answer. Just the sound of heavy, wet breathing on the other side. "Henderson, is that you?" A voice replied, but it didn't come from the door. It came from the deck outside, the floor-to-ceiling windows. "The tide is coming in," the voice wheezed. It sounded like it was speaking through a mouthful of water, and the caves are getting full. I spun around. Standing on the deck, pressed against the glass, was a figure. The fog made it look like a ghost, but it was all too real. It was wearing a tattered yellow slicker, but the person inside it was wrong. Its limbs were too long, its neck bent at an impossible angle. And then, it began to tap on the glass. Every time it tapped, it left a smear of thick black sludge on the window. Erica came out of the kitchen seeing the figure. She let out a scream that I will never forget, a high piercing sound of pure primal terror. The figure didn't flinch. It just leaned its face against the glass, its milky eyes fixed on her. Then, it opened its mouth. A stream of seawater and small wriggling silver fish spilled out of its throat, cascading down the window. "Open the door," the creature gurgled. "It's so cold in the deep." Erica didn't move. She was paralyzed, her eyes locked onto the thing behind the glass. The person in the yellow slicker continued to lean its weight against the window, the glass creaking under the pressure. Its skin looked like wet parchment stretched over a skull, and as it gurgled, I realized the sound wasn't just water, it was the sound of a lung-shot animal trying to whistle. "Get to the bathroom," I hissed, grabbing Erica's arm. "It's the only room with a deadbolt and no windows." "Go," she didn't argue. The calm thinker had completely vanished, replaced by a primal need to hide. She scrambled toward the back of the cabin. I grabbed a heavy iron fire poker from the hearth, my knuckles white. I didn't look back at the window, but I heard the thud, thud, thud move from the glass to the front door. Then the handle began to jiggle. Slowly. Methodically. "Ben, come on," Erica yelled from the hallway. I backed away, keeping my eyes on the door. The wood was thick, but the hinges were old. Suddenly, the jiggling stopped. A heavy silence fell over the cabin, broken only by the roar of the wind outside. Then a voice spoke through the door. It wasn't the gurgling creature. It was Mr. Henderson. "Ben, you in there, son? I saw your lights flickering. Just checking in." His voice was calm, paternal even. For a second, relief washed over me. I took a step toward the door, my hand reaching for the bolt. "Mr. Henderson, there's something out here. Someone's on the deck," I know Henderson said. His voice was right against the wood now. "They're just the shoreline boys. They get restless when the tide's this high. Just open the door, and we'll get this sorted." Something in his tone stopped me. It was too flat, too rehearsed. "The shoreline boys?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What are you talking about? One of them is..." "He's sick, Henderson. He's spitting up seawater." There was a long pause. "He's not sick," Ben Henderson said, and I could hear the faint sound of a smile in his words. "He's just full. The sea provides, you see. It provides everything we need, but it demands a trade, a life for a harvest." The realization hit me like a physical blow. The crabbers, the flayed seals, the photo of me. This wasn't a random haunting, it was a ritual. The village wasn't a quiet fishing community. It was a cult that had been feeding something in those black waters for generations. I heard more footsteps on the porch, multiple people. And then the sound of a saw. A manual crosscut saw biting into the wooden frame of the door. "Erica, the window in the bathroom," I yelled, sprinting down the hall. "You said there were no windows," she cried, her voice cracking with hysteria. The skylight, I reached the bathroom and slammed the door behind me, throwing the bolt just as the front door of the cabin gave way with a splintering crash. The bathroom was tiny. I stood on the toilet and looked up at the frosted glass of the skylight. It was small, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet. I smashed it with the fire poker glass raining down on us. "I'll push you up," I said. "Go to the roof, slide down the backside, and run for the woods. Don't go to the road. They'll be waiting there. Go to the high ridge." I hoisted Erica up. She was sobbing, her hands bleeding from the glass shards, but she made it through. As I reached up to grab the ledge to pull myself out, the bathroom door shuddered. A heavy weight hit it. The wood began to splinter. I saw a long, pale finger poke through a hole in the paneling. It was the creature from the deck. It wasn't wearing a glove. The skin was gray and translucent, and the fingernail was a jagged piece of shell. I hauled myself up, my muscles screaming. I rolled onto the cedar shingles of the roof just as the bathroom door was kicked off its hinges. I looked down through the skylight. 3 figures stood in the small room. Henderson holding a heavy, rusted cleaver, and 2 of those things. Up close, they looked even less human. Their bodies were distorted, their limbs elongated as if they had been stretched on a rack. They didn't have hair, just patches of what looked like barnacles growing out of their scalps. Henderson looked up and saw me. He didn't yell, he just pointed. I scrambled across the roof, the rain slicking the shingles. Erica was already on the ground waiting for me. I jumped, landing hard in the mud, and we bolted into the tree line. We ran for hours. The Olympic forest is a nightmare to navigate at night. Every branch felt like a hand reaching for us. Every rustle of the wind sounded like gurgling laughter. We didn't use flashlights. We followed the slope of the land, climbing higher and higher away from the shore. We eventually found a hollowed-out cedar log and crawled inside, shivering and clutching each other until the sun rose. When light finally filtered through the canopy, we didn't go back to the car. We hiked 10 miles inland until we hit a logging road and flagged down a truck. The police went to the cabin. They found my car, the tires slashed, and the interior filled with seawater. They found the cabin empty. No Henderson, no Shoreline boys. When they went to Henderson's address in the village, the house was a ruin, clearly abandoned for decades. The most terrifying part, though, came a month later. Erica and I had moved to a city in the Midwest, as far from the ocean as we could get. We were trying to move on, but Erica had become obsessive about her health. She kept saying she felt clogged up. One morning, I heard her gagging in the bathroom. I ran in, thinking she was sick. She was leaning over the sink, her face pale. "Ben," she whispered, looking at me with eyes that were starting to turn a faint milky white. "I think I swallowed some of the rain." She coughed a violent hacking sound. And then she spat something into the sink. It wasn't blood. It was a small, wriggling silverfish, and it was followed by a mouthful of black, salty sludge. She looked at me, and for a split second her jaw moved in that strange, jerky way I had seen on the beach. "The tide is coming in, Ben," she gurgled, "and it's so cold in the deep." I've always preferred traveling during the off-season. Fewer people, cheaper cabins, and a kind of quiet that usually helps me think clearly. 3 years ago, that preference nearly got me killed. I rented a small A-frame cabin deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains in a place locals called Ravenwood Ridge. It was supposed to be a quiet, solo getaway before my friends arrived later in the week. For the first 3 days, it was just me and my dog Hooper, a golden retriever who had never been afraid of anything in his life. The cabin sat miles from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by dense white pines that blocked out most of the sky. When I booked the place, the owner, a woman with a heavy smoker's voice, gave me one strange piece of advice. "Mind the perimeter," she said. "What does that mean?" I asked. "Just stay on the gravel and the marked trails," she replied. "People wander off up here. Sometimes they don't wander back." I laughed it off as a local superstition. The first day passed quietly. I hiked the marked trails, chopped firewood, and let Cooper roam freely while I cooked dinner. The silence felt peaceful at first. By the second night, it didn't feel peaceful anymore. The wind picked up after sunset, threading its way through the sharp angles of the A-frame. It didn't howl so much as whisper, slipping through the eaves, with a tone that almost sounded like distant voices. Cooper refused to step onto the porch after dark. He stood rigid by the front door, hackles raised, growling low into the black tree line. Probably deer, I told him, though. My heart didn't believe it. I went to bed early, but jolted awake around 3 a.m. 2. A sound that made my stomach drop. Metal hitting metal. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the living room. The sound was coming from just outside. I peered through the glass door. That's when I saw them. Hundreds of wind chimes hung from the pine branches surrounding the cabin. They hadn't been there before. I was absolutely sure of that. They weren't decorative either. They were made from rusted forks, jagged scrap metal, old keys, and what looked disturbingly like dental tools. They swayed gently, creating a chaotic metallic song that echoed through the forest. I stepped onto the porch. "Hello," I shouted. Nothing answered me. I cut them down in a panic, one by one, not caring whose property they were. When I reached a particularly large chime made of 3 rusted bone saws, I noticed something pinned to the tree behind it. A Polaroid photograph. My hands shook as I pulled it free. It was a picture of me sleeping in the cabin bed, taken through the bedroom window. At the bottom of the photo, a hand rested on the windowsill. A dirty hand. Long fingernails, inches from my face. I locked myself inside and didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, my friend Paul arrived. Paul was the skeptic. He worked in systems analysis and didn't believe in anything he couldn't quantify. I showed him the photo and the pile of chopped down wind chimes. "Looks like a prank," he said. "Local kids, maybe. Messing with tourists." "They were inside the room," I told him. Paul frowned, but shrugged. "We'll call the owner. Maybe the police. Let's not panic yet." We spent the afternoon checking the perimeter. That's when we found more signs. Stone spirals in the woods. Dolls made of twigs and human hair hanging from bushes. That night, Cooper crawled under the couch whimpering. Then we heard it. A soft humming. It was coming from the chimney. We rushed outside with flashlights and looked up. A man sat on the stone flue wearing a deer skull mask. He was humming gently, staring down into the chimney like he was singing to something inside. He dropped something down the flue. Seconds later, the cabin erupted into screeching chaos. The sound coming from inside the cabin wasn't just loud, it was violent. High-pitched shrieking filled the living room, accompanied by the frantic flapping of wings and the crash of embers spilling out onto the rug. Paul and I burst back inside, choking on smoke. Something was thrashing inside the fireplace. I grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall and unloaded it into the hearth. White foam and ash exploded outward, mixing with black smoke. When the noise finally died down, I saw what the man on the roof had dropped. It was a burlap sack. The bag had burned open, and dozens of birds spilled out starlings. Their wings had been clipped so they couldn't fly, and their beaks had been crudely filed into sharp, jagged points. Panicked and trapped, they attacked anything that moved, including us. One of them lunged at my ankle. I felt a sharp sting and kicked it away. Cooper was losing his mind now, barking and crying, skittering across the floor to avoid the birds snapping blindly at his legs. Get them out, Paul screamed, swinging a chair. But then, I noticed something else. The dining table I had shoved against the front door was moving. Not being pushed aside. Being pulled tighter against the frame. From the outside, a new sound cut through the chaos, slow, deliberate, and unmistakable. Someone was hammering nails into the door. "They are nailing us in," Paul whispered, his face drained of color. "They're actually nailing us in." Another hammer strike. Then another. Each one echoed through my skull. The man on the roof hadn't come alone. "Back window!" I shouted. We fought our way toward the small kitchen at the rear of the A-frame. Every step felt like walking through knives, birds, snapping wings, flailing glass crunching under our boots. I grabbed Cooper and tucked him under my arm as we reached the window. It wouldn't budge. I shined my flashlight along the frame. Screws. Thick industrial decking screws drilled in from the outside. They had planned this. Paul grabbed a cast iron skillet and smashed it into the glass. It shattered but didn't fall. A wire mesh held it together, denting with each blow. "Look," Paul said quietly. I turned. Outside the window, standing just beyond the reach of the porch light, were 4 figures. They were motionless. Each wore a different animal mask: a wolf, a boar, an owl. They stood hand in hand in a wide half circle around the cabin, all of them humming the same lullaby. My stomach dropped. "The pantry," I said. "There's a cellar hatch. Crawl space under the house. The foundation is loose stone." It was the only option left. We tore into the pantry, ripping shelves apart until we found the wooden trapdoor. When I pulled it open, a wave of rot and damp earth rolled up from below. We dropped into the darkness, the hatch slamming shut above us. The crawl space was barely 3 feet high. I dragged myself forward on my stomach, pulling Cooper by his collar. Paul crawled behind me, breathing hard. Above us, the footsteps grew louder. Then came the hammering again, but this time not at the doors. They were boarding over the vents. They were sealing the air. "Here," Paul whispered. He'd found a section of the stone foundation where the mortar had crumbled. We kicked and clawed at it like animals until one stone gave way, then another. Cold mountain air rushed in. I shoved Cooper through the opening first. He disappeared into the darkness without hesitation. I crawled out next and turned back, reaching into the hole. Paul grabbed my hand. I felt his fingers. Then his arm was yanked backward. He screamed. Something pulled him with terrifying strength. I heard a wet metallic clinking sound like wind chimes brushing against each other. A face appeared in the crawl space behind him. It was the cabin owner. No mask, just a deeply wrinkled face, milky cataract eyes, and a wide grin. "I told you to mind the perimeter," she rasped. She held a rusted dental hook buried in the back of Paul's leg, using it to drag him away. 2 more figures emerged behind her animal masks, glowing faintly in the dark. They pulled Paul back into the crawl space. The last thing I saw was his fingernails carving lines into the dirt as he was dragged away screaming. I wanted to go back. Every instinct screamed at me to fight, but then I saw him. The man with the deer skull mask stood 10 feet away in the trees, holding a gas can. He calmly poured fuel onto the pine needles circling the cabin. He struck a match. The fire erupted instantly. The cabin went up like a torch. Orange light swallowed the trees. I heard one final scream from inside before the roof collapsed inward. I ran. I didn't look back. I found Cooper a mile down the road, waiting beside a trail marker, shaking but alive. We ran until we reached the highway and flagged down a trucker just before sunrise. The police found nothing but ash. They identified Paul's remains in the cellar. 2 others were never identified skeletons that had been there for years. The cabin owner was never found. Months later, back home, my security camera caught someone on my porch at 3:14 a.m. An old woman. She leaned into the camera, holding up Paul's work ID. Then she taped a rusted spoon to my doorbell and whispered, "The perimeter is smaller than you think." I moved the next day, but sometimes late at night, when everything is quiet, I still hear metal clinking in the distance. And I know they're still watching.